The Rothschild Empire is one of the most mysterious and influential dynasties in history. The question is, what was the secret to their success? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out today. From humble beginnings in the Frankfurt Jewish Ghetto, we will see how one man named Mayer Amschel Rothschild became the richest man in Europe with an estimated net worth of $400 billion in today's money. We'll then see how he built Europe's first international banking empire by leveraging his 5 idiot sons who would go on to control the economic destinies of entire nations. Be sure to stick around because this story has everything: betrayal, assassination attempts, secret societies, and even the devil himself. Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born in the year 1744 in Frankfurt, Germany. At that time, Jews were legally barred from owning land or engaging in most forms of business, so they were relegated to living in squalor inside walled-off ghettos where they traded amongst themselves as local merchants. But young Mayer had bigger dreams. He didn't want to be stuck in the ghetto forever. Instead, he wanted to break free and become rich and powerful. And so he started at the bottom by doing menial jobs for the wealthy Jewish bankers who lived in relative luxury inside the ghetto walls. But it wasn't long before Mayer realized there was a much easier way to make money, and it involved collecting rare coins that had been minted for kings and emperors. You see, while most people might think of coins as worthless pieces of metal, at that time they were considered to be extremely valuable collector's items. Mayer traveled all over Europe searching for the rarest and most valuable coins he could find. And soon enough he had amassed such a large collection that he opened up a rare coin shop in the ghetto. But Mayer had a problem. Most people couldn't afford his rare coins, and so he needed a new business model if he was ever going to become rich. That's when he learned about a prestigious position called court factor, which was created by the Holy Roman Emperor. Essentially, the court factor was a financial agent who managed the emperor's money and did his banking for him. It was a very high honor to be selected for the role, but it came with enormous benefits. Not only did the court factor get access to the emperor's personal treasury, but he also got to mingle with the most powerful and influential people in the empire, and Mayer desperately wanted in. But there was a major obstacle standing in his way, namely the fact that he was a dirty ghetto Jew. Nobody in the upper class wanted anything to do with him. But Mayer was desperate, and so he made a deal with one of the local aristocrats named von der Tann. He agreed to buy the man's daughter a very expensive wedding ring in exchange for helping him get the court factor job. And it worked. Mayer got the job and soon became the trusted financial advisor of the emperor. But Mayer was not content with just managing the emperor's money. He wanted more, and so he decided to take a huge risk. He put everything he had on the line and established a private banking firm. Mayer then invited the emperor to become his first client, and he promised the man unbelievable returns on his investment. To his surprise, the emperor took him up on the offer and entrusted his personal fortune to Mayer's care. And that's when everything changed. Soon enough, other aristocrats started to take notice of Mayer's extravagant lifestyle, and they started bringing him their money as well. In no time, he had become the richest man in Frankfurt. And he wasn't done yet. Now, according to legend, Mayer had 5 sons, but he really had 6. The youngest son was born after the rest of the family had already moved to London. But we won't talk about him today. Instead, we'll focus on the other 5: James, Salomon, Karl, Anselm, and Amschel Jr. And we'll see how they helped their father build his empire. When Mayer's boys were old enough, he decided to send them to 5 different cities across Europe. James went to London, Salomon went to Paris, Karl went to Vienna, Anselm went to Naples, and Amschel stayed in Frankfurt. Each of the brothers would build a banking empire in their respective city, and they would work together to facilitate international trade. But it was no accident that their father sent them to these particular cities. You see, each of these cities were major financial hubs at the time, and they controlled the trade routes for much of Europe. By planting a Rothschild in each city, Mayer effectively gained control of the entire continent's financial system. But he didn't stop there. You see, at the time, Europe was being torn apart by the Napoleonic Wars, and Mayer realized he could use this conflict to his advantage. He secretly funded Napoleon's armies while at the same time he funded his enemies as well. This may sound confusing, but it made perfect sense to the Rothschilds. You see, war is a business, and the more chaos there is, the better it is for the bankers who fund both sides. And that's exactly what they did. They fueled the war until every single European nation was completely exhausted, and in the end, they profited massively from the conflict. This alone laid the foundation for their massive wealth. And Mayer knew that once his sons had built their empires in Europe, they would then move to America and help finance the U.S. War of Independence. That's why he sent his sixth son, Jacob, to America in 1773. While his older brother Amschel attended university in Frankfurt, Jacob instead chose to learn banking firsthand by working at a trading house in London. After a few years, he joined Mayer in Frankfurt, and together they planned their next move. In 1786, Jacob went back to London on his own to establish a permanent Rothschild presence in the city. 3 years later, Mayer followed Jacob and set up a shop on Mannheim Street, where he began amassing fortunes for the family. By 1796, Mayer was ready to retire, and he handed the reins of the business over to his 5 idiot sons. Then he set them some very strict rules to ensure the family's wealth never diminished. And those rules were never broken. First, Mayer stipulated that the bank would only hire male employees, and women were forbidden from working in any capacity. Second, he decreed that upon his death, his estate would be divided equally amongst his 5 surviving sons, and under no circumstances were they allowed to sell their shares to outsiders. Third, he mandated that all 5 branches of the Rothschild Bank would remain in close contact with each other and share all relevant information regarding their businesses. And finally, he insisted that his sons marry within their own family to keep the wealth and power in the hands of the Rothschilds. As you can see, Mayer was a brilliant strategist. Not only did he lay the foundation for his sons to dominate European finance, but he also set up a series of rules to ensure the family's wealth never diminished. And those rules ensured that the Rothschilds would remain one of the most powerful families in the world for centuries to come. But how did the Rothschilds get so much power? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out in Part 2. After watching this video, you'll have a deep understanding of the forces that shaped modern society. The year is 1815. Napoleon has just been defeated at the Battle of Waterloo, and far away from the battlefront, a man named Nathan Rothschild is celebrating with a bottle of champagne. You see, Nathan received news of Napoleon's defeat a day early, so he got to work buying up British government bonds. The next day, when everyone else heard the news and began buying those same bonds, their price had already increased, making Nathan a handsome profit. And, like that, the House of Rothschild was born. Now, you might be asking, who are the Rothschild? Well, the Rothschild were one of the first and most important banking families in history. They financed the Suez Canal, Cecil Rhodes de Beers, and John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. But since then, their influence has waned. In fact, all of their European branches have closed down. So how did the Rothschild go from being Europe's most powerful bankers to having no physical presence in the banking industry at all? Well, let's find out. It all started when Mayer Rothschild moved his family to Frankfurt in the late 1700s. Now, Frankfurt was the center for international finance at the time, and it didn't take long for Mayer to become one of the most respected bankers in the city. This reputation allowed him to expand to London, where he became the banker to the British royals. At the same time, his son Nathan moved to Paris and opened up a branch there as well. Meanwhile, Mayer's other sons, Amschel and Karl, opened up branches in Vienna and Naples respectively. Together, they formed what would become the most powerful banking dynasty in history. In fact, at their peak, they controlled roughly 2% of the entire world's wealth. That's equivalent to around $200 billion in today's money. But how exactly did they make this much money? Well, it's simple. Their business model was based on information. See, back then, communication was extremely slow. So if you had access to information that others didn't have, you could use it to make a ton of money. Take, for example, when Nathan heard about the Battle of Waterloo a day early. He used that information to buy up British bonds, which went up in value the moment the news of the battle reached the rest of the population. Or when the Rothschilds learned about the opening of the Suez Canal 10 years before it actually happened. With this knowledge, they bought up shares in the Suez Canal Company, allowing them to make a fortune when the canal finally opened. They also used their vast network to great effect. For example, when John D. Rockefeller asked the Rothschild for help financing his new oil company, they agreed on one condition: that they would receive 40% ownership in the company. Similarly, when Cecil Rhodes needed capital for his diamond mining company in South Africa, he turned to the Rothschild, who again took a large stake in the company. Over time, these investments grew into some of the world's largest companies, but they weren't without risk. At one point, half of the Rothschilds' fortune was tied up in Russian bonds. But when the Russian Revolution broke out, the Rothschilds lost everything. Yet somehow they managed to survive, and in the decades following, they recovered and became even more powerful than before. But after World War II, their power would begin to fade. You see, during World War II, 3 of the 5 Rothschild branches would get shut down: Naples, Frankfurt, and Vienna. The Naples branch was shut down because of the Italian Revolution of 1848, while the Frankfurt and Vienna branches were shut down due to the lack of male heirs. This meant that only the Rothschild branches in Paris and London were left, which already wasn't enough to keep up with the growing financial needs of Europe. After all, Europe had gone from this to this in just a few decades, and none of this growth would have been possible without banks like Rothschilds. But unfortunately for the Rothschild, there was yet another wrench thrown into their plans, this time in the form of Hitler. See, Hitler's rise to power spelled doom for the Rothschilds. As soon as he took office, he began persecuting the Jews, and the Rothschilds were at the top of his list. So they did the only thing they could think of to save themselves. They fled France. Amschel von Rothschild moved to London, while his brotherly heirs took control of the family fortune and relocated to Switzerland. In fact, even after the war ended and the Rothschilds returned to France, the French government still refused to return the assets. They claimed that they had been given to the French state as compensation for damages caused by German occupiers. The Rothschilds argued that this was absurd since they were the ones who had suffered the damages, not the French government. But in the end, it didn't matter. The French government had already decided that they weren't giving the assets back, and that was that. This meant that the once mighty Rothschild banking empire now consisted of just 2 London bankers, Amschel and Salomon. And that's when everything changed. You see, though the Rothschild had been forced out of Europe, they had a few bright minds in their ranks, particularly Jacob Rothschild, head of the London branch. Under his leadership, the London branch experienced explosive growth, handling over £500 million in assets by the 1980s. But as good as Jacob was, he knew that he couldn't handle the family business forever. So in 1990, he hired someone to replace him, his own son, Evelyn de Rothschild. Unlike his father, Evelyn was more interested in expanding the family business beyond banking. In fact, he wanted to take the Rothschild name public. But in order to do that, he needed to reorganize the entire company. So in 2008, he created a holding company called Rothschild & Co. and transferred all of the family's assets into it. This allowed him to sell parts of the banking business while keeping the family's most valuable assets hidden from the public. And ever since then, the Rothschild have continued to grow their wealth. Today, the family has a net worth of roughly $1.2 trillion. That's right, trillion. And though we don't know for sure what they invest in, we do know that they still hold on to their old investments. For example, the family still owns 43% of the French luxury goods company PPR, which is now worth roughly $50 billion, and they also still own a large chunk of the Israeli chemical company ICL Group. But perhaps even more impressive than their business acumen is their ability to stay relevant. You see, even though the Rothschilds are one of the oldest families in the world, they've managed to stay relevant for centuries. In fact, they're arguably more relevant today than they've ever been. Take, for example, the current head of the family, David de Rothschild. He's a prominent environmental activist and has worked with the UN to develop solutions to climate change. He's also a major donor to the Rothschild Foundation, which focuses on supporting environmental causes. And then there's his brother, Amschel Rothschild, who's taken a different approach to staying relevant. Amschel has focused on building up the family's reputation by donating large sums of money to various charities. For example, in 2013, he donated £1 million to the Imperial War Museum to fund a new exhibition on the Holocaust. And in 2016, he donated £5 million to the Jewish Chronicle, a local newspaper, to help it become financially sustainable. So, yeah, it looks like the Rothschilds have no problem staying relevant. But what do you think? Do you think the Rothschilds are a good or bad thing for the world? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you can't wait for the next video. And, of course, consider checking out our international channels to watch our videos in other languages, and consider subscribing to see more questions answered. But, until then, I'll see you guys on the next one.